Chelsea Abernathy tightened her backpack straps, proceeding through the bustling corridors of McKinley High, her hazel eyes seeking the quickest route to her next period. 17 years old, she possessed a subtle quality that let her disappear within the crowds easily. Her slight build, scarcely reaching 5 feet, 2 inches tall, gave her a delicate appearance to those not in the know. Her wavy auburn hair hung loosely around her face, frequently acting as a barrier from unwanted attention. Born to Irish immigrant parents, Chelsea had learned early that keeping a low profile was often the safest bet in a school where standing out could make you a target. What her peers didn't realize was that Chelsea had been practicing karate since the age of 7. Her mother, a former national competitor in Ireland, had insisted she learn to protect herself, but she had also instilled something just as vital. Restraint meant understanding when not to engage. Real power, she would often say, lies in the capacity to crush your adversaries, but choosing a more enlightened course. These words echoed in her mind daily as she navigated the social maze of high school. The ordeal had commenced 4 weeks prior, when Chelsea inadvertently brushed against Brandon Sterling in the lunchroom. Brandon, the self-declared ruler of McKinley High's social ladder, stood 6 feet, 1 inch tall, with the physique of a linebacker that made teachers turn a blind eye when he got too boisterous in class. His dark brown hair was always perfectly groomed, and his designer clothes proclaimed his family's affluence to anyone who cared to notice. What made Brandon especially dangerous wasn't simply his physical stature, but his aptitude to gather others to his cause. "Watch it, immigrant," Brandon had scoffed that initial day, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. Chelsea had merely apologized and walked off, but something in her composed demeanor had clearly annoyed him. Perhaps it was the manner in which she didn't shrink or plead for forgiveness. Perhaps it was how she met his gaze briefly before turning away. Whatever the reason, Brandon had decided she needed to be taught a lesson. His primary sidekick was Ryan McKinley, a scrawny blonde with a mean grin who seemed to thrive on moments when he could witness others in distress. Ryan was the sort who would film altercations on his phone and upload them online, guffawing as he watched the views increase. The third member of their posse was Brittany Lancaster, a girl whose beauty was only surpassed by her cutting remarks. Brittany had perfected the skill of social demolition, capable of destroying reputations with a few carefully chosen words. The tormenting had begun subtly, a nudge in the hallway here, a nasty comment there, but it had escalated rapidly. They would knock books from her grip, trip her on the stairs, and murmur cruel jokes about her looks just loudly enough for her to overhear. The faculty at McKinley High seemed to operate under the notion that if they didn't directly witness it, it wasn't their concern. Mr. Henderson, Chelsea's history instructor, had once observed Brandon accidentally pour soda on Chelsea's essay, but had merely sighed and told Chelsea she could hand it in the following day. Chelsea endured it all with the same composed demeanor that had initially drawn Brandon's attention. She would tidy up the mess, gather her scattered papers, and proceed with her day. Her fellow students, thankful not to be targeted themselves, would avert their eyes or pretend they hadn't observed anything. In the intricate ecosystem of high school social dynamics, Chelsea had become the chosen victim, the one whose suffering allowed others to feel secure. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday morning in late November. Chelsea had saved funds from her weekend job at her aunt's bakery to purchase a new sweater she'd been admiring for weeks. It was a simple yet stylish item in emerald green, the sort of clothing that made her feel self-assured and attractive. She had worn it to school that day, allowing herself a rare moment of optimism about fitting in. She was strolling past the display case near the auditorium when Brandon and his cronies spotted her. "Well, well," Brandon said, his voice carrying that particular tone that made Chelsea's stomach clench. "Look what the baker's daughter is wearing today. Did you find that in the dumpster?" Ryan chuckled, taking out his phone as he always did when Brandon was about to perform. Maybe her parents bought it with spare change from their shop. You know how they are with money. Chelsea attempted to walk past them, but Brandon moved into her path. "I'm addressing you," he said, his voice growing harsh. "It's impolite to ignore others." "I'm just attempting to reach class," Chelsea said softly, her hands instinctively moving to protect her new sweater. "Did you hear that?" Brittany chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "She believes she's too important to talk to us now. Perhaps that new shirt is giving her ideas." What transpired next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Brandon reached out and grabbed the fabric of Chelsea's sweater, his fingers twisting in the delicate material. "Let's examine how good this truly is," he said, and then he tugged. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the hallway as Chelsea's beautiful new sweater ripped down the front, leaving her struggling to cover herself with her jacket. The small group of students who had gathered to watch erupted in laughter. Ryan's phone captured every moment of her embarrassment as she stood there, her face burning with shame and anger. But it was what Brandon said next that truly shattered something within her. "Perhaps stick to clothes from your own country next time," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This American stuff is too good for you anyway." Chelsea bent to pick up her torn sweater, her hands trembling with rage. As she stood up, she noticed Michael O'Connell watching from across the hallway. Michael was in her AP calculus class, a quiet fellow with gentle eyes who had always been kind to her. He was one of the few people at McKinley High who treated her like a human being instead of an inconvenience. She had harbored a secret crush on him for months, and now he had witnessed her ultimate humiliation. The look of sympathy and anger in Michael's eyes was somehow worse than all the laughter combined. He began to move toward her, clearly wanting to help, but Brandon's crew was already dispersing, their entertainment over. Chelsea clutched her jacket tighter and ran for the nearest restroom, Michael's concerned voice calling her name echoing behind her. That afternoon, Chelsea sat in her car in the school parking lot, staring at her ruined sweater. Her mother's words came back to her, "Real power lies in the capacity to crush your adversaries, but choosing a more enlightened course." But what if the enlightened course wasn't effective? What if quiet composure was just another term for cowardice? She drove home and went directly to the basement, where her mother's old training equipment awaited. The punching bag hung in the corner, worn smooth by years of use. Chelsea changed into her training clothes and began to work, her fists and feet finding their rhythm against the canvas. Each strike was Brandon's smug face, each kick was Ryan's cruel laughter. Over the next few days, Chelsea's routine altered. She still attended classes, still completed her assignments, still worked at the bakery, but she also spent hours in the basement, pushing her body to remember skills that had grown rusty from disuse. Her mother noticed but said nothing, simply nodding approvingly when she saw her practicing forms in the backyard. The bullying continued, but something had shifted in Chelsea's demeanor. She still didn't retaliate, but there was a new quality to her silence. Where before she had seemed defeated, now she seemed to be waiting. Brandon and his crew noticed the change, but misinterpreted it as fear. They escalated their tactics, emboldened by what they saw as her complete submission. Michael O'Connell had noticed the change too. He had started walking the same routes as Chelsea between classes, not obviously following, but making sure he was nearby. When Brandon's crew targeted her, Michael would appear, his presence alone sometimes enough to make them reconsider. He never said much, but his steady support gave Chelsea strength during the hardest moments. It was Michael who inadvertently triggered the final confrontation. On a Saturday morning, he had gathered the courage to approach Chelsea at her locker. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "I was wondering if you'd be interested in attending the football game this evening. The McKinley Mustangs are playing at the stadium downtown." Chelsea felt her heart flutter. Despite everything that had occurred, Michael was asking her out. For a moment, the constant stress and humiliation vanished. "I'd enjoy that," she said, allowing herself a genuine smile. "Great," Michael said, his own smile lighting up his face. "I'll meet you at 6 on Saturday?" "Perfect," Chelsea replied, and for the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely happy. Unfortunately, Brittany Lancaster had been listening from around the corner. By Monday morning, the entire school knew about Chelsea and Michael's football game date. But Brittany had distorted the story, spreading rumors that Chelsea had pursued Michael, that she was desperate for any male attention she could obtain. Brandon saw an opportunity. If he could humiliate Chelsea in front of Michael, he could kill two birds with one stone. He had never liked Michael anyway, seeing him as too quiet, too studious, too decent for Brandon's taste. The confrontation occurred during lunch on Tuesday. Chelsea was sitting with Michael at a table near the entrance, actually laughing at something he had said. For a moment, she looked like any other teenager enjoying time with someone she cared about. Brandon couldn't stand it. "Well, well," Brandon announced as he approached their table, Ryan and Brittany flanking him. "If it isn't the happy couple, how was your little date, Michael? Did she make you pay for everything, or does she actually have money?" Michael stood up, his jaw tight. "Leave us alone, Brandon." "Oh, the boyfriend's going to defend her honor," Ryan laughed, his phone already recording. "This should be good." Brandon turned his attention to Chelsea, who had gone very still. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other day about not being able to afford nice clothes. Perhaps Michael can buy you a new sweater since you clearly can't manage it yourself." "That's enough," Michael said, stepping between Brandon and Chelsea. "Is it?" Brandon pushed Michael aside with casual strength. "Because I believe your girlfriend needs to learn her place in this school, and her place is at the bottom, where she belongs." Before Chelsea could react, Brandon grabbed her lunch tray and dumped it over her head. Cold pasta and salad pieces dripped down her face and onto her clothes. The cafeteria erupted in laughter and gasps. Ryan's phone captured every moment, but Brandon wasn't finished. As Chelsea sat there covered in food, he leaned down and whispered just loud enough for Michael to hear, "You could do so much better than this foreign trash. What would your parents think if they knew you were slumming it with someone like her?" That was when something snapped inside Chelsea. Not the public humiliation, not the ruined clothes, not even the cruel words. It was the way Brandon was trying to poison her relationship with Michael, the one good thing she had found in this nightmare of a school. Chelsea stood up slowly, pasta still dripping from her hair. Her movements were controlled, deliberate. The laughter in the cafeteria began to die down as students sensed something different in her posture. "You know what, Brandon?" Chelsea said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. "I'm done." Brandon smiled, thinking he had finally broken her completely. "Done with what?" "Pretending you belong here." "Done with you," Chelsea replied, and the way she said it made Brandon's smile falter. "What did you just say to me?" Brandon demanded, his voice rising. "I said I'm done with you," Chelsea repeated, wiping pasta from her face with deliberate calm. "I'm done with your pathetic need to hurt people to feel important. I'm done with your racist comments, and I'm done pretending that you're anything more than a sad, insecure boy who peaked in high school." The cafeteria was dead silent now. Brandon's face had gone red, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you can talk to me like that? You think you're tough now?" "I don't think I'm tough," Chelsea said, her voice steady. "I know I am." Brandon lunged forward, his fist aimed at Chelsea's face. What happened next would be talked about at McKinley High for years to come. Chelsea moved like water, flowing around Brandon's clumsy punch with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Her left hand caught his wrist, redirecting his momentum, while her right elbow drove upward into his sternum. The impact drove the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping and doubled over. But Chelsea wasn't finished. As Brandon stumbled backward, she spun and delivered a swift kick that sent him sprawling across the floor. The whole sequence took less than 5 seconds. Ryan dropped his phone, his mouth hanging open. Brittany stumbled backward, her face pale with shock. Around the cafeteria, students were on their feet, some cheering, others simply staring in amazement. Brandon struggled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "You little," he started to say, but Chelsea cut him off. "I'm not done," she said, her voice carrying a new authority. "You want to fight? Let's fight." Brandon charged again, this time trying to tackle her. Chelsea sidestepped and used his momentum against him, throwing him over her shoulder in a perfect jiu-jitsu throw. He hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him again. Ryan, seeing his leader getting dominated, decided to jump in. He rushed at Chelsea from behind, but she had been trained to fight multiple opponents. She spun, caught his arm, and twisted it behind his back while sweeping his legs. Ryan hit the floor face first, his arm pinned painfully behind him. "Stay down," Chelsea told him, her voice cold as ice. Ryan nodded frantically, tears of pain in his eyes. Brandon had managed to get to his feet again, but he was moving more cautiously now. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by the dawning realization that he had badly underestimated his opponent. He swung wildly, but Chelsea ducked under his punch and drove her fist into his ribs. The crack of bone was audible across the cafeteria. Brandon screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his side. He was done as a fighter, but his pride wouldn't let him quit. He pulled out his phone as if to call for help, but Chelsea was already moving. She leapt forward, her foot connecting with his chest in a perfect front kick that sent him crashing into the wall. Brandon slid down the wall and stayed there, gasping and defeated. For a moment, Chelsea stood over him, her fist raised for the finishing blow. The entire cafeteria held its breath, waiting to see if she would cross the line from defender to aggressor. But then Chelsea remembered her mother's words about real power. She lowered her fist and stepped back. "Stay away from me," she said. "Stay away from Michael. Stay away from anyone who can't defend themselves. Because if you don't, I promise you this was just a warm-up." Brandon nodded weakly, unable to speak. Around the cafeteria, students were applauding, but not the cruel laughter that had followed Chelsea's humiliation. This was genuine respect, admiration for someone who had stood up to a bully and won. Michael appeared at her side, his face full of awe and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," Chelsea said, and for the first time in weeks, she meant it. "Actually, I'm better than fine." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Principal Thompson, who had finally arrived, attempted to suspend all parties involved, but the dozens of witnesses and Ryan's own recording made it clear who the aggressor had been. Brandon received a 3-week suspension and was removed from the football team. Ryan and Brittany got detention and were banned from school events for 2 months. Chelsea received 2 days of in-school suspension, but it was clearly a token punishment. Principal Thompson had privately told her that while the school couldn't officially condone violence, he understood that she had been defending herself against a pattern of harassment. The change in the school's social dynamics was immediate and profound. Students who had ignored Chelsea's suffering now approached her with apologies and respect. The hallways that had once felt like a gauntlet became simply passageways to class. Teachers who had looked the other way now nodded approvingly when they saw her. Brandon returned to school 3 weeks later, his swagger gone. He walked with his head down, his broken rib still healing. He never bothered Chelsea again, and when their paths crossed in the hallway, he would actually step aside to let her pass. On the Saturday after the confrontation, Chelsea sat in her car in the school parking lot. But this time she wasn't hiding. She was waiting for Michael, who had asked her to the school's spring dance. As she watched students stream out of the building, she reflected on how much had changed. She had learned that sometimes the enlightened course wasn't about avoiding conflict, but about standing up for what was right. She had discovered that her mother's lessons about power and restraint hadn't been about weakness, but about choosing the right moment to act. Most importantly, she had learned that respect wasn't something that could be demanded or taken, but something that had to be earned. Michael appeared at her window, his smile bright and genuine. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Ready," Chelsea replied, and as they drove away from McKinley High, she felt truly free for the first time in months. She had found her strength not in violence, but in the courage to stand up for herself and others. The quiet girl who had once been an easy target had become someone who would never be a victim again. The story of Chelsea Abernathy and her swift kick would become legend at McKinley High, but more importantly, it would serve as a reminder that real power comes not from the ability to harm others, but from the courage to protect yourself and those you care about when all other options have been exhausted. 20,109 characters.